Samuel Turner had lived on his ranch for so many years that people in the nearby town often forgot he existed. He liked it that way. His ranch was far out in the open land, where the wind moved across the grass like a soft broom, and the sky looked endless. He woke up every morning before the sun, stretched his sore shoulders, and stepped outside to begin his quiet routine. Life had become slow and predictable, and he didn't mind. Predictable meant peaceful. Peaceful meant he didn't have to think about the pain he carried from the past. His ranch sat between the rolling desert, hills, and a small stream that never fully dried. He had a few horses, some chickens, and a big old barn that smelled of hay and warm dust. Samuel spent most of his time fixing fences, feeding the animals, and making sure everything stayed in order. With every sunrise, he repeated the same motions, the same tasks, the same thoughts. It kept his mind busy and his heart calm. Years ago, Samuel had a family. A small one, but a loving one. A wife who used to laugh loudly enough to fill the whole house, and a little boy who loved chasing chickens, even though they always ran faster than he could. But life had taken them away through illness, leaving Samuel alone in the big, quiet house. Since then, he had stopped expecting joy or surprise. He learned to accept silence as his only companion. He cooked for one, talked to no one, and spent most nights sitting on the porch, listening to the wind rather than thinking about anything else. But recently, something strange had been happening around the ranch. Little things. Nothing big, but enough to pull Samuel out of his usual calm. At first, he noticed that 2 eggs were missing from the chicken coop. It wasn't much, so he thought maybe he had miscounted. The next day, he found a feed sack in the barn moved from its usual place. He didn't remember leaving it there, but he shrugged it off. Sometimes he forgot things, especially on long days. Then, one morning, he found footprints in the dirt near the water trough. They were small, too small to be his. They looked almost like they belonged to a child, or maybe a woman. The land around the ranch wasn't heavily traveled, and visitors rarely came his way. He crouched down and touched the marks with his fingers, feeling the shape pressed into the soil. The prints weren't old. The edges were still sharp. Someone had been there while he was asleep. He stood up and looked around. The land stretched far in every direction, empty and quiet. He felt a little unsettled, not because he was in danger, but because he didn't like the idea of someone sneaking around without his knowledge. The ranch was his safe space, the only place he controlled. The idea of a stranger walking near his home made him more curious than frightened. He kept an eye out over the next few days. Each morning, he checked the barn, the chicken coop, and the area around the house. Sometimes he found nothing unusual, which made him think maybe he had imagined the earlier signs. But other times, the same pattern returned: small things missing or moved. Not enough to cause him harm, but enough to remind him that someone was close. One night, as Samuel was sitting at his usual porch spot with a lantern glowing beside him, he heard something soft coming from the barn. It wasn't the loud noise of a horse kicking or the clatter of tools falling. It was more like a gentle rustling, like cloth brushing against wood. He stopped rocking in his chair and listened closely. At first, he thought the wind was playing tricks on him. The desert wind sometimes whispered through cracks and lifted loose hay. But as he listened longer, the sound continued. It was steady, like someone trying to move quietly, but not quietly enough. Samuel took a slow breath and stood up. His knees complained like they always did, but he ignored the pain. He grabbed the lantern, holding its metal handle tightly, and stepped off the porch. The yard was dim, the moon half hidden behind thin clouds. The air felt cooler than usual, carrying a kind of stillness that made every sound feel louder as he walked across the yard. The crunch of dirt under his boots seemed too loud. He tried to step lightly, but a lifetime of heavy work had made his movements firm and noticeable. The barn sat a little distance away, its old wooden boards glowing in the lantern's soft light. When he reached the door, he paused and listened again. The rustling was still there. He pushed the door open slowly. The hinges creaked a sound he had meant to fix months ago, but never did. The moment the door opened, the noise inside stopped completely. Samuel lifted the lantern higher, letting its warm glow spread across the barn interior. He saw shadows first. They moved quickly, like something trying to hide. He narrowed his eyes and stepped farther inside, scanning the corners, the stalls, the old crates stacked along the wall. He didn't see anything right away, but something inside him told him to keep going. Near the far corner, the lantern light caught a small movement. A shape, low to the ground, trying to stay behind a stack of hay bales. Samuel tightened his grip on the lantern and took 2 more steps. The light spread, and that was when he saw her. A woman, thin, tired, with long dark hair that fell across her face, was crouched beside a pile of feed sacks. Her clothes were worn, dusty, and torn in a few places. In her hands, she held a small cloth bag, and Samuel could see she had already taken a few potatoes and dried corn from his supplies. Her eyes were wide, frightened, reflecting the lantern's glow like 2 trembling flames. Samuel froze. She was not what he expected. He had imagined maybe a young troublemaker from town or a traveler passing through. But this woman looked nothing like that. She looked desperate, almost too exhausted to stand. Her hands shook as she clutched the small pieces of food. She looked up at him, and in that moment, Samuel felt the weight of everything unsaid between them. He was angry that someone had been sneaking into his barn, yet something about her eyes stopped him from raising his voice. They were the eyes of a person pushed to the edge, not someone doing wrong out of bad intention. He didn't speak for a long moment. Neither did she. The only sounds were the faint crackling of the lantern and the soft breathing of the horses nearby. Finally, Samuel asked in a quiet but firm voice, "Why are you taking my food?" The woman didn't move. Her fingers tightened around the cloth bag as if she feared it might be taken away. She swallowed hard, her throat dry, and her lips parted. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely louder than a whisper. "My kids are hungry." Her words were simple, but they carried a heavy truth. They weren't the words of someone trying to excuse bad behavior. They were the words of a mother who had run out of choices. Samuel didn't know what to say, but those 4 words stayed in his mind as he stood in the barn, lantern light flickering on the walls. Realizing that the quiet life he had lived for years was about to change in ways he never expected. Samuel stood in the barn doorway with the lantern raised high, its warm light trembling against the wooden walls. The woman did not move. She stayed low to the ground, clutching the small cloth bag filled with a few potatoes and bits of dried corn. Her eyes were wide with fear, but there was something else there too: exhaustion. The kind that comes from days, maybe weeks, of worry. Samuel was not a man who scared easily, but something about the situation made his heart beat faster. Perhaps it was because this was the first time in years someone had stepped into his quiet world. Or perhaps it was because she did not look like someone who wanted to cause trouble. She looked like someone who was barely holding herself together. He took 1 slow step toward her, not wanting to make her panic. "Stand up," he said softly. "Let me see you clearly." The woman hesitated, then slowly rose to her feet. She was thin, almost too thin, and her clothes hung loosely on her frame. Her dress was worn and dusty from travel, and her shoes looked like they had survived longer than they were meant to. Her face was tired, but she carried a quiet dignity even in her fear. Samuel held the lantern a little higher. "Tell me what you're doing here," he said. She lowered her gaze, took a shaky breath, and repeated the words she had said earlier, this time a little clearer. "My kids are hungry." The simplicity of the sentence hit Samuel harder the second time. He expected excuses, maybe a lie, maybe anger. But instead, her voice carried a deep sadness that made it impossible for him to feel anything but concern. He studied her face for a moment. "Where are your children?" he asked. She lifted her eyes, and Samuel saw a mother's worry in them, sharp, deep, and protective. "They're waiting in the hills," she said softly. "I didn't want them to come close until I knew it was safe." Samuel frowned. "Safe from what?" "Safe from you," she answered honestly. He didn't know whether to feel insulted or surprised. He had never harmed anyone and lived quietly, far removed from trouble. But he understood. When someone is worried for their children, even the gentlest stranger can feel unsafe. "What's your name?" He asked Nayeli. She whispered. She spoke the name with a softness that suggested she hadn't said it freely in a long. Perhaps because she had been hiding, surviving, or running from something. Nayeli, he repeated, making sure he pronounced it kindly. And how long have you been taking food from my ranch? She looked down again, ashamed. Only 2 times before tonight, she said. I didn't want to steal, I just didn't know what else to do. Her voice trembled. Samuel could see she was holding back tears, trying to stay strong. He knew that feeling. He had lived with it for years after losing his own family, trying to stay upright. Samuel stood there quietly, watching the 2 small children hold on to their mother as if she were the only safe place left in the world. The night around them felt calmer now, as if even the wind understood the seriousness of the moment. The lantern behind Samuel cast a soft circle of light that touched the edges of the children's tired faces, revealing how pale and exhausted they were. For a few seconds, none of them spoke. Nayeli held both her children close, whispering something gentle to keep them calm. Samuel could see that she herself was trembling, not from cold, but from the heavy fear she'd been carrying for weeks. The children didn't cry, but their silence said enough. They were hungry, scared, and uncertain. Samuel cleared his throat softly, careful not to startle them. Why don't you come inside the barn? He suggested. It's warmer there. Nayeli looked at him with a worried expression. Is it safe? She spoke more to herself than to him, as if her heart was torn between caution and hope. The barn is just a place with hay and warmth, Samuel said gently. Nothing more. After a long moment, she nodded. She took each child by the hand, and they followed Samuel back into the barn. He walked slowly, not turning too quickly or moving too suddenly. He wanted the children to feel as safe as possible. Inside, the barn smelled of hay, horses, and the faint sweetness of dried corn. The lantern light made everything glow golden. Samuel picked up an old, clean blanket he used for sick animals and placed it on a pile of hay. You can sit here, he said softly. The children sat down immediately, curling into the blanket. Nayeli sat beside them, still holding her bag of food tightly, even though Samuel hadn't tried to take it away. He didn't want her to think he cared about the food more than her situation. After watching the children settle, Samuel finally said, You didn't have to hide from me. His voice was gentle, but honest. Nellie looked down at her hands. I didn't know what kind of man you were, she said quietly. I have met good people, and not so good people. I couldn't take chances with my children, Samuel understood. Trust was not something people gave freely, especially when life had pushed them so close to the edge. The older child, a small boy with sharp eyes, looked at Samuel. Are you mad at my mama? He asked timidly. Samuel shook his head. No, son. I'm not mad at her at all. The boy nodded, as if trying to decide whether he believed the answer. The younger child, a little girl, leaned against her mother's shoulder and said softly, I'm cold. Samuel stepped toward the barn shelves and picked up another thick cloth. He placed it gently over the girl. She looked at him with wide, trusting eyes, as if she had never seen someone offer help so easily. Thank you, Nayeli whispered. You're welcome, he replied. The barn fell quiet again. Samuel wasn't sure what to say next. It wasn't every day that he found strangers, especially children, hidden in the hills near his ranch. He had been alone for so long that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to speak to people who needed him. It's for something other than feeding animals or repairing fences. Finally, he asked, How long have you 3 been traveling? Nayeli sighed, her shoulders drooping. Weeks, she said. Maybe more. I stopped keeping count. Every day felt the same. Wake up. Walk. Find shelter. Search for food. Try to sleep. That sounds difficult, Samuel said softly. It was, she admitted. We came from a place far from here. After my husband passed away, nothing was the same. There wasn't enough food in our village, and without him, it was hard to survive. She paused to help her daughter get more comfortable under the blanket. She continued, I knew I couldn't stay there. I had to find a place where my children had a chance. So we left. I hoped someone would help us, but most people were struggling themselves. Some were kind, but couldn't give much. Others turned us away, Samuel listened quietly. He could hear the pain in her voice, not loud or angry, but heavy and tired. When we reached these hills, she went on, I saw your ranch from a distance. I watched it for days. I didn't want to come close. But I saw food, animals, and a strong house. I thought maybe if I took a little food, it would help my children get through the next day. Her voice cracked just slightly, but she held herself together. Samuel felt a deep ache in his chest. You should have knocked on my door, he said quietly. I would have helped. Nayeli gave him a tired, small smile. It's easy to say that when you're the one with food, she said softly. I didn't know you. I didn't know if you would help or send us away. It's fair, Samuel admitted. The boy leaned forward, curious. Mama said we would only take enough to not be hungry, he said. She said stealing is wrong, but she said staying hungry is worse. Nayeli closed her eyes briefly, pained by her son repeating her words. Samuel's heart tightened even more. This was not a situation of wrongdoing. This was survival, plain and simple. After a moment, Samuel said, What are your children's names? The boy brightened slightly, proud to answer. I'm Mateo, he said. And my sister's name is Arya. Samuel nodded. Those are good names. Strong names. Arya gave him a shy smile. It was small, but it was the first time her face looked a little less worried. Samuel took a deep breath, thinking. He needed to decide what to do next, not just for the night, but for the days ahead. These children couldn't sleep outside again. They couldn't wander the hills with empty stomachs. And Nayeli clearly needed rest, safety, and help. He reached into a wooden crate near the horses and pulled out a few apples he had stored there. He offered them to Mateo and Arya. Their eyes lit up instantly. They each took one carefully, as though afraid it might disappear. They began to eat slowly, savoring every bite. Watching them eat made Samuel's decision clearer. He couldn't let them return to the cold hills. They needed somewhere safe, even if only for a little while. Nayeli, he said suddenly. She looked up, alert and cautious again. You and your children can stay for the night, he said. It's too cold outside. The barn isn't fancy, but it's warm and dry, and I'll bring more food. Nayeli's eyes widened. You mean we can stay? Yes, he said simply. Just for the night, for now. We'll figure out the rest later. Her face softened with relief, so deep it was almost painful to witness. Thank you, she whispered. You don't know what this means. Samuel nodded, though he felt it in ways he didn't fully understand. Helping them didn't feel like charity or burden. It felt right, as he stepped out of the barn to fetch more blankets and food. He realized something unexpected. He no longer felt that old, familiar loneliness pressing against his heart. Instead, he felt a quiet purpose rising in its place. And deep down, he knew this was only the beginning of a much bigger change in all their lives. Samuel walked slowly back toward the house, the night air cool against his face. As he crossed the yard, he kept glancing back at the barn where Nayeli and her children waited. The warm glow of the lantern inside comforted him more than he expected. He had lived alone for so long that he forgot what it felt like to have people nearby, people who needed him, trusted him, or simply existed beside him in the quiet. Inside the house, everything looked exactly the same as it always had. His plates were neatly stacked on the wooden shelf, the kettle sat on the stove, and a small round table stood empty as it had for years. But tonight, the house felt different. It felt bigger somehow, or perhaps it simply felt less lonely now that he knew others were nearby. Samuel pulled out a few blankets from a trunk near his bedroom. They were old but clean, carefully folded and kept for emergencies. He also gathered some bread, dried meat, and a jar of beans he had cooked earlier in the week. He placed everything into a large basket and carried it outside again. When he returned to the barn, he found the children curled up under the blanket he had given them earlier. Nayeli sat beside them, gently stroking her daughter's hair. She looked up when Samuel entered, her eyes full of gratitude and that same tired fear that never completely left her face. I brought food, Samuel said softly. Placing the basket down, Nayeli nodded. Thank you. You're very kind. Mateo sat up quickly when he saw the bread. His eyes brightened, and Samuel couldn't help but smile. "Go on," Samuel encouraged. "Eat." The children didn't need to be told twice. They ate slowly but eagerly, making sure not to drop a single crumb. Nayeli waited until they had taken their share before she reached for anything herself. Even then, she took only a small piece, as if still afraid of taking too much. "You don't have to be shy," Samuel said gently. "There's more in the house." Nayeli paused, holding the bread lightly in her hands. "Old habits," she said quietly. "On the road, I always made sure they ate first." "That makes you a good mother," Samuel replied. She looked down, grateful but embarrassed by the compliment. He could tell she wasn't used to hearing kind words about herself. After the children finished eating, Samuel helped Nayeli arrange a small sleeping area with the blankets he brought. The barn wasn't the most comfortable place in the world, but it was warm, dry, and much safer than the cold hills. He noticed how Arya clung to her mother's sleeve as she lay down, how Mateo watched the barn door as if making sure no one would come to take them away again. "You're safe here," Samuel assured them. "Get some rest." Nayeli nodded. "We won't cause trouble. We'll leave in the morning." Her words surprised him. "Leave?" he repeated. "Of course," she said, as if it were obvious. "We didn't come to stay. You were kind enough to help us too." Samuel woke up early the next morning to the gentle sound of soft footsteps outside his house. For a moment, he thought it was the wind playing tricks on him, but when he stepped outside, he saw Nayeli sweeping the porch, even though he had never asked her to do such work. She looked up and gave him a small smile, the kind of smile she had not shown on the first day. Her children were nearby, feeding the chickens carefully, as if the birds were fragile treasures. The ranch looked more alive than it had in many years. Samuel stood there quietly, taking in the peaceful scene, realizing that something inside him had changed. Days passed, and weeks, and each day brought unexpected warmth to Samuel's life. He had been used to silence in the mornings, silence in the evenings, silence in his heart. But now he heard laughter, small conversations, and the happy noise of children running around. He began to feel that the ranch was no longer a lonely place. It was becoming a home again, not just for him, but for everyone living there. Nayeli worked hard every single day. She woke up before sunrise, cooked meals, helped with the horses, fed the chickens, carried water, fixed fences, and learned more about the ranch with each passing week. She never complained, even when the sun was burning hot or when her hands were tired. Samuel noticed her effort, her dedication, and the care she showed toward everything on the land. She didn't work like someone trying to repay a debt. She worked like someone trying to rebuild her life. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned golden, Samuel sat on the porch sharpening his old tools. Nayeli came up to him with a basket of vegetables from the small garden she had started. She told him the vegetables grew faster than she expected and she wanted to use them to cook dinner. Samuel looked at the basket and then at her, feeling grateful not just for the food, but for the life she had brought back to the ranch. That evening, they all sat at the table together, sharing a quiet but warm meal. The children, who once ate in silence with nervous eyes, now talked freely about the things they saw on the ranch, how a baby chick followed them around, how the horse sneezed on them earlier, how they found a shiny stone near the fence. Samuel listened to their stories with a gentle smile, not realizing that his heart had softened more than he ever expected. After dinner, the children played outside while Samuel and Nayeli washed the dishes. The sound of the children's laughter floated through the open window, mixing with the soft wind. Nayeli looked around the kitchen and said that she had never imagined her children would be this safe and happy again. She thanked Samuel for giving them a chance when he could have turned them away. Samuel paused, the warm water running over his hands, and told her honestly that he did not save them because they had saved him too. Without them, his house would still be quiet and empty. Without them, he would still be living with the weight of sorrow. Both of them stood there in silence for a moment, understanding the truth in each other's words. The next day, Samuel went to town for supplies, and for the first time in years, he felt excited to return home. People in town were curious when they heard he had a family staying with him. Some were doubtful, some were surprised, and a few were supportive. Samuel did not care much about what others thought. He knew the truth of his own heart, and that was enough for him. But slowly, as the weeks passed, even the people in town began to see the changes. One morning, when Nayeli went to buy cloth to mend clothes, the storekeeper noticed how polite she was and how kindly she spoke. The children also caught the attention of others with their bright manners and gratitude. At first, some people watched from a distance, unsure if they should welcome her. But as they saw her hard work, her gentle behavior, and the calm way she carried herself, their hearts slowly opened. Soon, some of the women started greeting her kindly. A few even offered her extra vegetables or shared stories of their own families. Nayeli accepted everything with humble gratitude, never expecting more than what was given. Her quiet strength earned the respect of those who once judged too quickly. Back at the ranch, Samuel and Nayeli continued their daily routine, working side by side. Sometimes they spoke for hours. Other times they worked in peaceful silence. Samuel found comfort in her presence, and she found safety in his. One evening, after fixing the fence together, they sat under the wide-open sky. The children chased fireflies nearby, filling the air with small bursts of joy. Samuel looked at the sky, full of stars, and told Nayeli that the ranch had never felt this alive before. She looked at him with soft eyes and said that she never imagined she would find a place where she and her children could breathe freely again. As more time passed, Samuel began teaching the children how to ride horses. Their laughter echoed through the fields, and Samuel enjoyed every moment of their excitement. He remembered the days when he rode with his own family. While those memories still held pain, they no longer cut as deeply as before. The presence of the children had made room for new, brighter memories. One day, the younger child, a little boy named Loma, ran up to Samuel with a small wooden horse he had carved. He handed it to Samuel with a shy smile and said he made it for him because Samuel had been kind. Samuel held the small carving carefully, feeling something warm spread through him. It wasn't just a toy. It was a sign of trust, a bond formed from kindness and patience. The seasons changed, and the ranch began to flourish. The crops grew more evenly, the animals seemed healthier, and even the air felt lighter. Samuel was no longer the lonely rancher who slept in silence every night. He had become someone who listened to the soft breathing of children sleeping in the next room. Someone who shared meals and laughter. Someone who looked forward to another day, nay, two. Found herself healing in ways she had not expected. She had feared the world after losing her husband, but the ranch gave her a chance to start again. She learned new skills, found new strength, and discovered that kindness still existed in the world. She never forgot the night she had been caught in the barn, trembling with fear, certain that everything was over. If Samuel had chosen to push her away, her life would have taken a very different path. But instead, he gave her hope, and she held on to it with both hands. Now, as she looked around the ranch, she felt something deep in her heart, something like belonging. Her children were healthy, growing stronger each day. They had a future again. And Samuel, the man who once kept everyone at a distance, had become the closest person in their lives. One evening, as the sun slowly set behind the hills, Samuel stood near the fence, watching the children play. The sky was painted with soft colors, orange, pink, and light purple. Nayeli stepped beside him, her hands gently folded. They didn't need to speak. The moment said everything. They had survived hunger, fear, loneliness, and loss. And now they were standing together in a place that felt safe. Samuel breathed in deeply, feeling the peace he had long forgotten. Life had changed in ways he never expected. All because one desperate night brought him face to face with a frightened mother trying to feed her hungry children. What started as a moment of fear had grown into something beautiful: trust, companionship, and a new beginning. As the children laughed and ran across the yard, Samuel felt grateful for the life he now had. He knew tomorrow would bring more work, more challenges, and more moments to cherish. But tonight, under the soft colors of the sky, he felt something he had not felt in years: hope. and he silently thanked the day when fate brought Nayeli and her children to his lonely ranch, turning it into a home once again.